Very good. Well, welcome, and look who came to visit me. He's actually walking towards me, so by the time he got closer, I have to unfortunately step on it. This is a white-tail, it's called? Yeah, the white-tail spider. And anybody have gotten bitten by this spider? Supposedly it tends to be, quite a poisonous type of spider. Reminder, the book is still there. I've still a few copies left. So anybody's interested, go ahead and pick up your Pandemic Busters. And the research is there. I'm going to be citing some of my research as well as the Twitter account. So we have what we call the 4 killers. The 4 killers are what also is known by the metabolic syndrome. And there are 4 of them. Is diabetes, it is hypertension, it is problems with cholesterol and lipids, and obesity and overweight. If you have one of them and you keep doing what you have been doing, you're probably going to collect number 2, number 3, number 4. But today we're going to learn what we can do about it. Notice an important factor here that was documented to increase the issues of metabolic problems is loneliness. And that is a huge problem here in Australia. So let's start the story by visiting the Marshall Islands. If you are in New Zealand and you go north from New Zealand, you will arrive to the Marshall Islands. Marshall Islands, small group of islands there in the Pacific. In 1954, the U.S. government started building edifices of different materials, and then they would detonate atomic bombs so they could test, which materials are more resistant and which materials are more vulnerable and so forth. Very interesting research. But as a result of that, they started sending radiation to some of the neighboring islands, and many of the islands started getting health problems. So those islands took the U.S. government to court. And of course, you can even go to YouTube and see those videos. This is not something they were making them up. So as a result of suing the U.S. government, the government had to pay a nice amount of money to those islands as a result of those suits. Now, think that you're one of those people that live in those islands. These islands are beautiful. They are, nice and beautiful, but the infrastructure is very poor. What are you going to do with so much money? They don't even have, malls to go shopping and so forth. What are you going to do with so much money? Well, these people got a second bomb, and this time was a bomb of food. And they started bringing to those islands things that their ancestors never ate. And they changed their diet from simple roots, fruits, vegetables, a few seed products, and now today their favorite food is Spam. I always wonder, who eats this Spam? Those islands in the Pacific love that Spam. If you're not familiar with Spam, you may think that that's a term in the email. The reason why they put that name in the email is because it happens to be one of the worst of the worst. They take the pig, and what they couldn't process with the pig, they just grind that thing and make this canned product called Spam. That's what Spam is. That's their favorite food today. Frozen turkey tails, junk food, and all these processed foods. So the sad reality of the people of the Marshall Islands, they have one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. Why did that happen? They are people with bad luck or something? Bad habits. In fact, statistics tell us that among the adult population, 90 to 95% of them either have prediabetes or diabetes. That is how much tremendous numbers of diabetes are in those islands. And this is a real photo of one of those people from the Marshall Islands 70 years ago. Diabetes in those islands was unknown. Nobody had this problem. So what happened to these people? How come so much diabetes? Well, I'm very glad that we have now this little device that tests the glucose. Have you ever done that? You know, they poke you in the finger, they get a little bit of blood, and they put it in that machine. Because in the old days, if you wanted to diagnose diabetes, the person would have to urinate, and the doctor would have to taste that urine. Aren't you glad for that little machine? I'm very glad as a doctor. What were they tasting? If it was what? Sweet. That's how they would do the diagnosis for diabetes. Another way that they would do it, they would put the patient to urinate next to a place where there was a bunch of ants, and what would happen? If it was diabetes, the ants would go and start going where the person urinating. So basically, diabetes is too much glucose circulating in your blood. And there are different tests that we can run that gives us information about how much glucose is in the body. And we could do a fasting glucose, in which we poke the finger after the patient is fasting, and depending on the levels is what we classify as pre-diabetes or diabetes. We can also do glucose tolerance test. So they give you a bunch of glucose, and then based on that test, you put really to the test that pancreas. Certain cases of diabetes that are kind of, we don't know if they have it or not, we can find it like that. And then we have the hemoglobin A1C that we can test, depending on what happens. So here you can see some of the factors that we can take into our hands in order to help us prevent diabetes if we want to prevent it, and or help us to make changes if we already have the diabetes. So number one there is physical inactivity. Can we start doing more exercise? Is that possible? Yes. Absolutely, you can start doing more exercise. Overweight and obese. Is it possible to lose weight? Yes, absolutely. Poor dietary habits. Can we change our food habits? Yes or no? Yes. Hypertension. Can you do something for hypertension? Yes, you even saw the clinical case of our patient, how we were able to help him with his blood pressure medication, stop that. Smoking. Can you do something about smoking? Yes, you can do something about it. And also certain medications. Sometimes it's possible to make the right changes and so forth. So the symptoms of diabetes is not just one, it's gonna, have this thing. No, it's a wide variety of possible symptoms that can present themselves with diabetes. One of the classic ones happen to be that hunger that the patient gets, even though there's a bunch of glucose circulating in the blood, the body cannot take advantage of that glucose, and then the person needs to find a secondary source of energy. So the body starts destroying the fat, destroying the muscle in order to provide energy for the body to survive. But the person feels hungry, so they eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and they're even losing weight because the body is not able to take advantage of that food. And remember what they were tasting in the urine? It was what? Sugar. So the body starts dumping that sugar through your urine. And in order for the body to have less sugar, you get this thirst and you drink and drink and drink and drink water, which is basically diluting that glucose and decreasing that. Also, if the person is not careful with their diabetes, one of the most fearsome things are these diabetes complications, which can range from losing your kidneys, losing the sensitivity to your legs, problems in your eyes, atherosclerosis, so the artery starts clogging in, and so forth. And many times, depending on the person, many times depending on the type of medication they're on, sometimes that hyperglycemia, the glucose is going too high, so you have this set of different potential symptoms that the patient can present when the glucose is too high. But that actually doesn't worry us as much as the hypoglycemia. This is the one that worries us, and if you are a diabetic, you need to be familiar with these symptoms, because a hyperglycemia is not going to kill the patient, but a hypoglycemia could, when the sugar goes way too low. And you'll see them there, with this sweating and shakiness and fast heartbeat, and they feel anxious and so forth. You poke that finger, man, that's glucose in their 40s or something very low. So here you can see an interesting study here. Compare somebody with the type 2 diabetes versus somebody that doesn't have that type 2 diabetes in the amount of abdominal fat. This is an image of your abdomen, and you can see there that whitish area, all that is fat. Notice that type 2 diabetes, there is just too much fat there. In statistics from Australia, this is a couple of years ago, but you can see that type 2 diabetes happens to be the most common type of diabetes that we find in Australia, following the pattern in other places worldwide. So here's one of the reasons why type 2 diabetes causes your glucose to go high. So many people, because of inactivity, because of wrong type of food, they start accumulating fat inside the cells. So the more fat you start accumulating, that starts interfering with the doorknob mechanism that we have in our cells for the glucose to go inside. So think about it. If too much fat inside the cell is causing us what we call insulin resistance, what do we need to do? We need to lose some of that fat inside the muscle cells. Specifically, muscle cells are problematic. And the glucose cannot go in. So this is something interesting here. In this very interesting study that was done in America, they were trying to identify which groups of populations happen to have a higher risk for diabetes. And please notice here, among the groups that get diagnosed with just a little bit of excess body weight include the Vietnamese and the Chinese. Those are the two most vulnerable ethnic groups. You don't need to have tremendous morbid type of obesity, just a few extra kilos. So that's why, if you are Pacific Islander, if you are Aboriginal, if you are Southeast Asian, if you are Latino, if you are Indian, gaining more than a body mass index above 23 puts you at very high risk. So you need to be extra careful with your weight if you are from any of those ethnicities, or you will develop the diabetes easily. So the problem with having that high glucose, the triglycerides are going up, the proteins, because there's so much sugar, the sugar starts sticking to the proteins, and that causes many problems. Your cholesterol goes up, your blood pressure goes up, and this one is worrisome. You create growth because the insulin starts going high in the body, and high insulin in the body causes things to grow. High insulin in the body is what makes you gain weight. It causes the fat cell to grow, but also cancer cells can be stimulated to grow if the insulin level is too high. And it's a vicious cycle. The person gains more central obesity, and the central obesity causes more insulin resistance. So there's a certain number of glucose that gets stuck to your red blood cells naturally. But when somebody has too much glucose circulating, too much of that glucose gets stuck to the red blood cell, and that's not good. So what can we do for prevention and treatment? Well, one thing we can do, we can understand the concept of what's called the glycemic index. So glycemic foods, the glycemic characteristics of foods are how fast a food enters into your bloodstream after you eat it. So I don't want to eat too many of the high glycemic foods because those foods enter too fast into my bloodstream. Instead, I want to switch my diet into a more of a low glycemic type of food because those foods enter more slowly into your bloodstream. Therefore, you don't get those curves of high glucose going on your system. Or we can also put numeric values to this. So the way this chart works, white bread is 100. That's too high. I don't want to be eating that type of food. Now, let me tell you the principle. So you don't have to remember every single one of these numbers. You just need to remember the principles. The principle is if a food is processed, it's high glycemic. If a food took a while to cook it, it's high glycemic. For example, find there something like cornflakes. What number does it have? See, 119. Why is it so high? Because you take the corn and you boil and boil and boil and boil and boil and boil the thing, and then that's when finally becomes, the cornflakes. That's too much cooking. Same story with instant rice. That's why it's so high. By default, white rice tends to be a high glycemic food, but if we add that pre-processing, this is going to go even more higher. So what I want to do, I want to be shooting about 80 and down, and that's how I want to eat this. And also, I want to eat, and let me tell you what's going to be your best friend, I want to eat beans. Beans are the best friend of the diabetic. For example, look at soybeans. What number does it have? 35. Many beans have a similar number. So when you eat, you can eat potato, but don't eat the potato by itself. Eat beans with the potato, and the glycemic index is going to go down. Or check out broccoli. What number does it have? 15. So I want to eat green things, salad and so forth, big salad, those things also have very low glycemic index, so you can combine those things and lower it further. But I'll tell you a few more tips ahead. So as I told you, this is our patient there that we help him stop and reverse his type 2 diabetes. What did we do? Changing his diet, exercise, sleep, and so forth. We were able to help this patient lose that excess weight. This is another one of my studies, and in this study, what we were doing, we took all the patients that had high blood pressure, and then we measure how much medication they were taking, and then 18 days later, we check after doing the changes, after visiting the different physicians we have on board, how much medication we have been able to cut down on these patients. By the end of 18 weeks, we were able to decrease the medication in 93% of the patients in only 18 days by making those radical lifestyle changes. And this is what 3,500 calories look, which is equivalent to half a kilo of fat. Now, some people think that they're just going to go around the corner and they're going to lose 3,500 kilos. You are not. You know, me as a runner, if I run really, really hard for about 45 minutes, I may burn almost 700 calories. You know. So one strategy to lose that excess fat is to do a lot of exercise. Now, how much exercise you need to do? Well, I just gave you a hint, you know, 45 minutes, really, you know, hard running, 600, 700 calories. So you need to be running or doing a lot of exercise, 4 or 5 hours of exercise a day. Now, number one challenge is who has 4 hours to start doing exercise, isn't it? You need to do other things in your life, isn't it? Number two, who has the endurance to do 4 or 5 hours of exercise? You know, you need to have quite the endurance in order to handle that amount of exercise. So I have a better idea. Why don't we change our diet? If we change our diet and decrease the caloric load, we can decrease the amount of food the amount of calories that we are eating. So here you can see a little glimpse of what do the people in the Marshall Islands are eating. Notice that is all those high glycemic foods that we just talked about. Can you see them? There's the white rice, there's the white bread, there's the donuts, there's the spam, the chicken, the ramen. All these things are the wrong foods if you want to avoid diabetes. In fact, it's very sad. Look at this chart that tells us what do the people of the Marshall Islands eat. How much plant foods? Those are the ones, you know, that tend to have lower glycemic index. 5. The rest of it is processed foods, and then that 20% way too high, too much cholesterol, too much inflammation, too much oxidation that will take place in their bodies. So there are some people that unfortunately, because of their genetics, they have this diabetes predisposition. I'm actually one of them. I mean, I did a genetic test, and my genetic test says that I am at very high risk for diabetes. How come if I punch my finger, everything is normal? Because even though the gene is there, my actions and lifestyle is what's going to determine if that gene is going to kick in. If I start eating all this junk food and coffee and so forth, I guarantee you I'm going to end up diabetic. So some of us are like that. I mentioned a few ethnic groups. You know, if you're among those ethnic groups, you are going to be at high risk for diabetes. Now, if you're not from those ethnic groups, but you had background in your past, some of your ancestors were in wars, were in famines, were in situations in which there was not enough food, there's a group of genes called the thrifty genes, in which your genes learn to survive with very little. And if you have those thrifty genes, when you get the overabundance of the lifestyle of the Australian, it's too much, and you're going to develop diabetes also. So, in this study, these people from the Marshall Islands were put on a lifestyle change. And the goal was to show that it is possible to reverse or to control that diabetes on people that that have that genetic predisposition to diabetes. And basically, this is what the usual program looked like. We started the day with a nice walk. Then we took the fasting glucose. This was going to be published as a study, so that's why multiple samples of glucose were taken. Then the whole food, plant-based breakfast. Then they had a lunch. Then another glucose. Then the exercise. Then another glucose. Then the cooking class, dinner, walk, lecture, and then an evening blood glucose. So we needed to restore that insulin sensitivity. So in order to do that, we needed to help him to lose that excess weight that we were talking about and help decrease that fat, abdominal fat that I told you is what makes him very vulnerable. And this is a diet that we gave him, which to me is very interesting because this diet is found in the very first book of the Bible and in the very first chapter of the Bible. You know, and this is like in the very, very beginning, so you don't lose it. I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be what? Your anti-diabetic foods. It's been there for a long time. So, one factor that is common today is people skipping breakfast. In this study, it was shown that skipping breakfast raises your risk for type 2 diabetes by 33%. Why? What is the number one reason why people skip the breakfast? They ate too much in the evening. And their stomach and digestive tract is just tired from working all night long. As you want to rest, your digestive tract wants to rest. Don't overburden your system. So what ends up happening is that you end up not wanting to eat in the morning. And the more you skip the breakfast, the more you increase the risk. People that skipping it 4 or 5 times a week increase that risk by 55%. Because this is the principle. You are more diabetic at night than in the morning. So if you're more diabetic at night than in the morning, what does that mean? That you're able to handle a bigger number of calories earlier in the day than in the evening. That is the principle. So this is something that can lead to an increase of insulin resistance, and those glucose waves that you cause is what we think may be triggering that diabetes. So one of the best things that the diabetic can do is they need to eat a good breakfast. In fact, should be the most abundant food of the day. And the problem is that metabolic syndrome starts causing problem. In this study, it was shown that those males with metabolic syndrome actually end up damaging their sperm. And that is going to translate as problems in their fertility and so forth later on. So, as you can see, this is a complex, multifactorial type of problem. And what we need to do, we need to deal with these factors. So the best way to deal with these factors is with a whole foods, plant-based diet. So instead of being diabetics by design, we need to apply a diet by design. So what are we going to eat? A whole food, plant-based diet. Now let me give you this tip. The number one enemy of the diabetic is not sugar. The number one enemy of the diabetic is fat. That is your number one enemy. So we need to, number one, start to decrease the amount of fat that we are eating. And secondary, we need to start eating things that are low glycemic. So we need to go back to find the local foods. You don't need to be buying, expensive, imported food, that is super expensive. Find the fruits and vegetables that are on season, and that's what you need to be eating. So here is one of the most important charts you're going to see this evening. This is the caloric density of food. In other words, when you eat this, how much calories are you consuming? Now, let's start on the one end there with the oil and fat. Those foods are tremendously loaded with calories. That's why I'm telling you, you need to start decreasing those fats. I've seen people that have their nice, beautiful salad, and they say, oh, I heard olive oil is good for me, and man, you just ruin your salad, It's just too many calories that you're adding to that. Now, if you are a student of the Bible, you're going to see, for example, in the Bible, olive oil is mentioned everywhere. But the level of activity of those people were very different than ours. Those people didn't have running water. They have to carry their own water. Those people didn't go shopping to the, to the store, their food. They have to cultivate their own food. Those people didn't have gas and electricity and these type of things. They had to go and bring, the piece of wood so they could cook and things like that. So their life consisted of, calories after calories after calories of physical activity, and our life is too sedentary. So that excess oil, I'm telling you, is not doing any beneficial thing. It's just bombs of calories in your body. Then you can see there nuts and seeds. Be careful with those nuts and seeds. We need to, be in moderation. There's a reason why they come in a hard shell. So you can, work yourself and break them and so forth. But we buy in package, man, the whole thing is like that, boom, 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 boom. You're putting a ton of calories. Nuts are good, but just a little handful, okay? Just a little handful. Then you can see junk food on average is too many calories. So say goodbye to McDonald's and Hungry Jack's and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and all these things are not the best things for the diabetic. Then you can see there on average this complex carbohydrates, and then you have fatty protein. And then you want to move on the other side. Most of your food should fall on green. As I told you, legumes, which are your chickpeas, your lentils, your beans, all that groups of foods are the best thing that a diabetic can eat, because they have a bunch of fiber, they are loaded with nutrition, and keep their glucose under control. And by the way, if you don't have diabetes, but you want to control your weight, that's what you need to do also. You need to go on that direction. So if you notice, this is like the light of traffic. There is green, there is yellow, and there is red. Watch out, don't cross too many of those reds, you're going to get a ticket. And then you have unrefined carbohydrates. Those are good for you. So things also like the potato, I told you, you can eat potatoes, but don't eat it by themselves. Eat it with a huge salad or with some beans. That's unrefined carbohydrates. And then you have fruits, and notice vegetables. See, vegetables, you can eat a bunch of that. I promise you, you're not going to gain weight because you're going to feel full. That's the reason why if you've seen a cow, these things are just eating and eating and eating and eating and eating the whole day because it's low caloric food. They need to eat a bunch of that in order to survive. So we want our food to be on that side of the equation. Look at this one about sodas, specifically Coca-Colas. Drinking 1 or 2 Coca-Colas a day increase the risk of diabetes by what? 20%. And sadly, low-income people tend to consume more Coca-Colas. And that's a sad reality. This is definitely not a good food for you at all. So what's the solution? We need to go back to the local foods, to the things that are accessible, available. Even here, how much is a kilo of beans? $2. How much is a kilo of beef? You can eat, your beans for the next 3 weeks in what you were going to pay for 1 kilo of meat. See, so it's even better for your economy as you do that. I mean, if you cook 1 kilo of meat, how many people can eat from that? If you cook 1 kilo of beans, how many people can eat that? You don't have to ask the neighbors to come, It's too much food that you're making. So it is an excellent way. So you may be telling, well, doctor, but what happened is that I'm a busy person and I work the whole week and so forth. Many of us are like that. So what you do, you plan ahead. In the weekend, you cook your beans, you put them on Ziploc bags, you put that in the freezer, and you come home, and just warm up, your meal is there. So no excuse whatsoever that you cannot eat those beans. Also, canned beans are a good option. Canned beans, they're pre-cooked and everything. You just warm your chickpeas, your beans, and so forth, and you can eat them. As well as low-calorie foods such as pumpkins and so forth. Now, this is something important that I want you to learn. The order of your food, what you eat first and so forth, also has an impact on your glucose. So I want to eat first the lowest glycemic food, which happens to be what? Your salad, your vegetables, So you want to eat that first. Then your protein and fats, proteins, your legumes, your tofu, and so forth. And lastly, you want to eat those starches, your pasta, your potatoes, and so forth, including your food. If you're able to do that, you can reduce that glucose by 73%. As simple as just changing the order of your meals. And again, if your goal is to lose weight, it would be a good idea also to follow this pattern, because by that we can decrease the insulin by 48%. And what do we say? Insulin is what makes you gain weight. So by decreasing that insulin, that's going to help you lose some weight. And the reason why it works is that fiber from those vegetables, starts coating our intestinal walls, and in that way, when the time comes to start absorbing the glucose that is decreased. This is actually from a published paper that was done. And this one also. You need to eat the fruit the way God made it. If you start making these things and put them in the blender and juices and things, you increase very much the glycemic index. As we're going to see in the next lecture, sometimes it's good to use that smoothie and so forth, but we'll be dealing with that in a minute. So, as you can see here, as a general rule, tropical foods tend to have a higher glycemic index. So what are we going to do? We are going to eat that with some other high fiber food, and it's okay, I can eat them, okay? Now, things like berries tend to have very low. So the curve that you're seeing is how much glucose is going up after you eat them. Still is within acceptable range, that pineapple. If you notice, still is in the green side, so still is acceptable. But if I take apple, banana, strawberries, and I put them in a smoothie, look at what you do. You just spike tremendously the amount of glucose in our body. Now, if I put some protein powder, there's some plant-based protein powders that you can get, such as peas and things like this, then notice the difference in the curve, as that protein powder helps to decrease those curves tremendously. And you can see here regarding apples. If I eat the whole apple, that's completely fine. Still is in the green part. You know, it's acceptable, the curve. But if I make that into a smoothie, now that starts going even further up. And if I make that into juice, not even the fiber is there anymore, then I really pick this up quite a bit. So we've run out of time, so let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break, and we'll come back to the next part of our lecture. Thank you very much.